Welcome everyone to AlumniTALK, Columbia's virtual speaker series, where we gather some of the college's most prominent alumni to discuss critical challenges in today's world and share their personal and professional insight. My name is Gary Hall, and I was class of 2011 in the college and currently am a board member of the Columbia College Alumni Association, which represents all 52,000 college alumni around the world. Today's event will focus on race and the workplace. While studies show that increased diversity leads to greater innovation and improved outcomes, organizations continue to struggle with the lack of diversity across levels, but most notably in upper management. This naturally leads us to the question of how can companies address diversity, equity, and inclusion? We've gathered a great panel of executives across industries to help answer this question, to examine the barriers to advancement for professionals in marginalized groups, and to address the topics and questions on your mind. To that point, if you'd like to participate in the Q&A, please enter your question into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen and include your graduation year. Your entry will only be visible to the facilitator, and if selected, our moderator will ask your question on your behalf. Please submit questions at any time throughout the discussion. With that, let me introduce our wonderful panel. First, we're very pleased to have Sheena Wright, Columbia College class of 1990, who is president and CEO of United Way of New York City. Sheena is the first woman to lead United Way of New York City in its nearly 80-year history, and in that position, she plays an instrumental role in helping solve some of the most complex challenges facing low-income New Yorkers. Next is George Van Amson, class of 1974, who is a managing director at Morgan Stanley. George is one of Columbia's most distinguished alumni on Wall Street, having had a 40-year career in financial services and multiple mentions on Black Enterprise's list of the top African Americans on Wall Street. He has always been a dedicated alumni volunteer, most notably as a trustee emeritus of the university. Rounding out our panel is Jaime Prieto, class of 1983, who is currently the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Ontrak, an AI-enabled telehealth counseling company. Jaime has had an incredible career in marketing and advertising, with highlights such as launching the Moto Razr phone and creating entirely new categories like dove hair. Last, but most certainly not least, our panel moderator is Judge Joseph Greenaway. Judge Greenaway graduated from Columbia College in 1978 and currently is a jurist on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Notably, he received his commission from a fellow Columbia College alumnus, President Barack Obama. Judge Greenaway is a trustee of the university and has led more alumni volunteer efforts than we probably have time to mention today. So thank you to all of our amazing speakers. And with that, please take it away, Judge Greenaway.
Thank you so much, Gary. I really appreciate it. And of course, wonderful introductions for our great panel. This evening, folks, I thought we'd start our discussion talking about how corporate America has changed over time. And I wonder whether we could start our discussion focusing on our own experiences when we joined the workforce, as opposed to what's happening in the workforce today, with particular attention to diversity and opportunity. George, I wonder if you could start off our discussion.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Yes, absolutely. Delighted to be here and thank everyone involved for including me. In answer to your question, Joe, when I started in the business, financial services, some years after graduating from Columbia, there was not a single Black managing director or general partner at any of the top 7 or 10 firms on Wall Street, not a single one. And over the years, it was kind of a game to see who got promoted. There was a point where I knew every Black partner or managing director at the top firms at the time. And so that shows you now the progress that has been made, but that we have so much further to go. And the fact that firms may have 25 or 30 or 50 partners or managing directors that are Black out of 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 shows the limited progress that has been made. That, in a nutshell, will tell you what the environment was like then and the halting progress that has been made now.
Thanks, George. Jaime, I wonder if you could share your experience as a marketing executive. First, are the numbers the same as George mentioned on Wall Street? And then what kind of progress has happened since then?
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the question. So happy to be here with everybody. I have a very similar story and experience. I started on Madison Avenue. That's where people in advertising and marketing start in the mid 80s. And I ended up at one of the best firms in advertising called Ogilvy and Mather. And it was incredibly white and male. There were some female executives. I remember there was only one senior vice president who was African American. There was, the only place I saw Latinos were in the administrative staff. And it was, you know, it makes you feel like I'm a bit of an outsider here and I'm going to try and navigate my way through this whole matrix and this whole entire system. That's very similar to what George was talking about. I think that we've made some significant progress, but unfortunately I feel it's happened in the last 18 months because of a lot of unfortunate events, beginning with Me Too, which really kind of revealed the veil over what was happening in terms of gender discrimination. And obviously with Black Lives Matter as a reaction to many of the injustices that we've experienced over the last year and a half that we've seen, which have been around for a long time. And so that's created an acceleration, but it feels less like something that's gradually changed. I think that it's a more recent reaction, certainly in the media business.
Thank you. Sheena, you've had a wonderful career, very interesting, and you are navigating both the business world, the law world, and doing it well, as they say. So tell me what your experience was like, and then maybe you can transition into how do you take advantage of opportunities? I think a lot of the listeners want to know what can they do to sort of move the progress along.
Thank you so much. And I think it's interesting, like we're going decade by decade, from George in the 70s and Jaime in the 80s. And I started my career in the 90s and after graduating from Columbia Law School. And I started my career as a corporate lawyer. I practiced for 10 years. And interestingly, the firm where I worked, I was the second Black woman to work there in the history of the firm as a lawyer. And the first Black woman was sometime in the 80s. And she actually had to, when she left, she sued them for discrimination. So that's kind of the
wow.
And so as the second Black woman, and obviously the only Black woman at the time that I started, certainly there was just culturally, it was a very white male environment, just kind of not quite understanding how to engage with me. And it was a very interesting experience. The other thing, and just in terms of being a woman, in 1994, women were not allowed to wear pants. And I know that just sounds crazy. And what was even more crazy was that the women partners enforced that and reinforced that because it was not deemed professional for women to wear pants in 1994. And it was, of course, the associates, it was a revolt, like, what is, and eventually I think, after I left, women could wear pants. But, those, and then, kind of in the journey, being the first woman to be the CEO of the United Way of New York City, and its over 80-year history also tells you United Ways as institutions are very closely connected to the corporate sector. So this, again, this perspective, it's a very corporate environment. It's a man's job, right? That man is supposed to be the head of that organization. So also, kind of some culture shock. And I think, how do you move the needle? How do you, one, you accept the challenge. When I was leaving Columbia Law School, I was thinking about doing public interest or corporate. And my mother, who's also like a social justice warrior, said, you need to do the corporate work, not only because of what you're gonna learn and bring back in terms of your social justice work, but also what you're gonna bring. Take the challenge, go into that room as one of few or only one, and know that you're bringing something to that organization or culture or conversation. And I would say the other thing is, just to build allies and community outside of the place where you're, small in number within that place, and focus always on systems change. I mean, and that's how, we banded together to demand that we could wear pants. That was a collective effort after people got sent home, because they came in as wearing pants. But I mean, and today, right, there's been front page articles recently about law firms being not diverse at all still. So there's still definitely a lot of work to do. Although I think there's a moment to seize an opportunity, there's still a lot of work to do.
So this is, Sheena, that was great. And it leads me to want to hear from both George and Jaime on the very notion that you just talked about, which is everyone acknowledges that the numbers aren't good and haven't really changed appreciably over time. But what can individuals do? George, maybe share with us an experience, an approach that you engaged in, because I know you're always one to lend a hand back to make sure you're pulling along others. What have you experienced? What have you done to make sure that more people are part of the participation on Wall Street?
Well, thank you for that question. I think everyone in the industry has to wrestle with this problem, right? It's not just our problem because we, come from a different part of the world or that our melanin content is significantly higher. It's everybody's problem. We all have to work on it. Some of the things I've done throughout my career is, in addition to trying to be successful on the direct commercial side, which gives you a lot of leverage and a lot of opportunity to be involved in decisions, I found that being involved in recruiting, hiring, training, and mentoring is essential to filling that pipeline of younger people of color, and particularly Black, young Black and women coming into the industry. But in addition to recruiting and mentoring and providing advice and counsel, is exposure to make sure that students have the opportunity to be exposed to this particular business. Because heretofore, it was not a given that a Black student would be exposed to financial services or Wall Street or money and investing. And by and large, it is not in the family lineage, right? I didn't have an uncle that was a senior partner on Wall Street. My dad didn't trade stocks. My mom was not a private equity investor. And so you have to make sure that there's exposure and then opportunity, coaching, mentoring.
Thanks, George. Those are great thoughts. Jaime, to close out this part of our conversation, I wonder if you could share with us some of your experiences as to specific things that you've done and observed in your field marketing is something I claim absolute ignorance other than the cases that come before me. So I'd love for you to share with us some of your thoughts and experiences.
Sure. I mean, let me touch on 2 points, and one George just talked about a little bit, and that's the notion of what I always felt it was important to, on a day-to-day basis, in every interaction, in a one-to-one or in a group meeting or whatever it might be, to make sure that I was doing my very best work to perform. And it's an unfortunate thing, at least in my generation. I had to absolutely demonstrate that it was about my ability. And the reason I talk about it that way is because there's an interesting unconscious bias at the time. We didn't even use that term. But I would be in meetings where people assumed that I was maybe Italian or Greek, because what's this Latino guy doing? In their own minds, they couldn't kind of connect those dots. And I would always correct them. I'd always explain. And that was like an interesting dynamic. It was a kind of like passive, almost kind of passive racism, unconscious bias that you would run into. And then beyond that, starting to try and convince people that, you know what, and we have it much more now, but back even in the 90s, even in the 2000s, it was very difficult to get clients to agree to diverse casting for big national marketing and advertising campaigns. If you recall, it might have been about 7 or 8 years ago, there was an ad that Cheerios did. Beautiful, beautiful little girl, I think it was. She had one gorgeous curly hair. She was gorgeous. And at the end of the ad, it revealed that she was a biracial child. And at the time, General Mills, the company that owns Cheerios, was lauded for their incredible progressivism, and it got incredible amounts of earned influence. And I think a lot of people felt really good about it. But think about that. That's only 7 or 8 years ago. And the fact is that the African American community, the Hispanic community in the US, had to build their own agency and marketing teams to advertise to those individuals separately. I think we're now at a point where there's room for both, but we're seeing much more of a total market approach to how we portray people in marketing campaigns for the biggest, most important brands that everybody consumes on a daily basis. So I think that's, again, some other progress. But when I think back on it, I think, wow, that was really something to live through at the time.
Well, that it's important that you shared that, because I don't think that I remember the commercial well, but hearing the sort of backstory and a perspective from someone in marketing, I think is really important. So thanks for sharing that with us. I want to just move to a slightly different topic and focus. You know, our country is in the midst of tumultuous times now. We're dealing with a pandemic, nationwide elections, a technology-enabled national viewing of a murder of a Black man, George Floyd. I wonder if you all could share what effect have these events had in the workplace of ideas, your own particular environments? What have you thought? What have you observed? Sheena, maybe we can start with you, please.
Sure. And I think, just so interesting what Jaime was talking about in terms of marketing and communications when we think about media and culture, right? And the stories that are told in mass media about what's important or valued or what's predominant, right? When we are actually moving very quickly to a majority of America being people of color, when you think about our marketing images, like who the consumers are, it's not them, and that there's so much kind of work to do. And so I think, technology, and particularly with the murder of George Floyd, I majored in history at Columbia, so I immediately thought of Bloody Sunday and how the televised, the whole world watched that, and how it started to change hearts and minds, and how it was such a key strategy, even when you look at the movie Selma, to moving on legislation, right, for the civil rights movement. And I think what's different today is, because we've seen atrocity, we've seen violence. What's different today, it's that it's on a loop. You don't have to wait till the 6 o'clock news. It is constant, it is persistent, and it is all kinds of devices where you can take in this information about what's happened in terms of the inequities. And I think in my work and in my world, there's a whole new conversation happening about charity versus justice, right? And not dancing around, oh, we want to help poor people and communities and blah blah blah, but saying, okay, why in fact are schools underfunded in Harlem and the South Bronx, et cetera? Because we calculate the funding of education based on property taxes, and because of systemic racism that redline communities that so that they could not have home ownership and wealth, those schools are underfunded. Like, the system has produced the results that it was designed to produce. So it's a whole different kind of conversation that hopefully will spur a set of different solutions and activities in terms of how we think about how do we solve the problems of systemic poverty and how that is so directly connected to systemic racism in this country. So I'm excited about that there is a recognition about the root causes of many of the social problems that we have, and that will help us get to a real plan that can solve some of these problems.
No, thanks so much. That was a really fulsome response that leads me to a lot of different thoughts. But I wonder, George, would you share some of your thoughts? I know I'm happy to give you attribution. The technology enabled was your phrase, and I stole it. But it's a good one, because we've had a national collective experience watching a man die in front of us. I wonder, what have your conversations been like in your workplace, and what kinds of actions have they spawned in that environment?
So technology enabled is available to everyone. Feel free to use it. But Sheena talked about technology enabled when she talked about the events on the racist Edmund Pettus Bridge, or the dogs in Montgomery, Selma, Jackson, and Birmingham, which laid bare what was happening all along. But the general public, including President Kennedy, saw it and was moved to do things. Lyndon Johnson took over after him, and he had a witch's brew. Civil rights movement, Vietnam War, women's rights movement, much the same way as we're having now, except there was a better measure of leadership. So we fast forward to this generation, and technology is so much better, so much quicker, goes worldwide. And things that have been discussed over and over again are now laid completely bare in its ugliness. And I'm not talking about the murder of George Floyd, which was horrific, right? We saw the beating of Rodney King. What I'm talking about, for example, is the Central Park incident, where a woman boldly weaponized the ugliest parts of racism to challenge a Black man who, in other circumstances, would absolutely fear for his life. And without that technology to record that for posterity, who knows what might have happened? Well, we know what might have happened. We could have bet what might have happened. So with all of that, couple that with what I believe is the total and complete abdication of leadership at a national level, a pandemic, recorded murders, and the whole issue of justice, supremacy, and systemic racism in the country, all of that now is laid bare, and businesses are being affected by it. They are coming to look through the prism that we look through and seeing things somewhat differently. That purely from a Machiavellian commercial standpoint, they have to do better because the world is changing. Purely from that. But from a justice standpoint, they see that their workers, Black and white and whatever, are troubled by this, and how do they deal with their talent? They recognize that there is a problem: exclusion, lack of inclusion, systemic racism, inherent bias, any number of names that you want to put to it. And if this was a simple business problem where a competitor was doing better than you were, and it was a problem that had to be solved, it would be solved by the best companies. So now they are beginning to put resources to examining these problems and trying to find a way to solve them. It could be scholarships, it could be recruiting, it could be counseling, it could be standing shoulder to shoulder with your Black and Hispanic LGBTQ plus community to show support to them. But let me be frank. Every major company is on the hunt for a chief diversity officer. Every major company worth its salt who deals in the broader community is trying to address this in some way. How long will it last? I'm interested in seeing the report card, Memorial Day 2021, because Memorial Day 2020, was when a lot of companies woke up. I applaud it, but I want to see progress.
Well, progress is the way to judge it. Jaime, I want to pose something for you in just a second. Progress is the way we judge everything. And of course, I just before I pose this to you, Jaime, I just want to pull on something that both Sheena and George touched on, and that was the events on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and what that and other actions at that time spawned, right? At that time, the country knew what the ask was, right? The ask was the Civil Rights Act. The ask was the Voting Rights Act. The ask was trying to get the Equal Rights Act passed. The ask was the affirmative action legislation signed by Richard Nixon. All of those were part of the ask in an attempt to make the country more fair and equitable. So my question for you, Jaime, as we think about this in business terms and the workplace, what is the ask? And if you don't accept that framing, what's the demand?
Yeah, I think that this is the critical issue at the moment, because in the examples that you gave, the ask was about structural change, tangible laws, legislative decisions, things that would help advance and change some of the issues and injustices we were seeing. And I think the challenge right now is much more behavioral change. And that, in some aspects, is much harder, not to diminish the struggle and the work that had to be done to get us to where we needed to get back in the 60s. But now we're asking a deeply divided country to rethink how it thinks and therefore reimagine how it behaves. And so I think that the change needs to be both sustainable and substantive. And it's interesting, the notion of chief diversity officers is really important, but it's a beginning, not an end. And to the extent that companies see that as a first step, as opposed to some sort of Band-Aid that's going to make it all better, does a disjustice to the role, the people that are in it, and everyone else who needs to feel like they're being supported and have an opportunity to advance and be part of the, a seat at the table. So, I agree with George. I think it's not so much, we saw a lot of activity. We saw a lot of well-placed, meaningful support and gestures from people over the past few months. What's that going to look like in the next 12, 18 months? And I think it needs to be much more about how do we find, because there is a lot of talent out there. So how do we identify that talent and put it in leadership roles? And in critically important, show the younger generation, the junior and up and coming workforce of color, that there is a place for them, that their voice is being heard, and that there are mentors and role models. And those people are there, as signs of success and progress.
Jaime just brought up a wonderful point, which is how do we make sure that change is not ephemeral, right? That's really the key. One of the things that each of you have spoken about this evening is change has happened in your work life and your workspace over time, right? There are many on who are watching us today who are in their 20s. They have some time. There are folks on who, like me, are in their 60s. We have less time. How do we make sure that change isn't reflected only in the next few months and is actually reflected over the next years or decades? How do we do that? Sheena, would you start us off on that?
Sure. I am a believer in what gets measured gets done. And, I think we have to have a clear kind of equity index that, again, is not just for, and I think to Jaime's point, it's not just for kind of broad legislation, but the corporate sector should adopt a set of principles, metrics that will determine and measure the level of inclusion and diversity and equity of opportunity, in all sectors, and in philanthropy, as well as investment. I think the next stage of the civil rights movement really was about economic empowerment, right? That's when all the assassinations started to happen, when Martin Luther King started talking about economic empowerment. And that's something that needs to be addressed in terms of how are we being very intentional about making sure that we're righting the wrongs of the past in terms of socioeconomic mobility in this country for people of color, and opportunity, and that there are metrics around educational opportunities in that pipeline. There are metrics around salaries, right? There's all the studies that show you can be Black, Latinx with the same degrees and credentials, and you will be paid less. You will have less opportunity. Even though, as Jaime mentioned as well, you're probably outperforming, right? So there are lots of things that we can really point to in terms of an agenda that can be measured. And there's a responsibility across sectors, government, nonprofit, corporate, to really set that agenda and move us forward. And as you said, George, let's measure in a year. Let's have benchmarks. Okay, this is our baseline. This is where we are. Again, I use the example of law firms. Where are we going to be in a year? And then we can see what the accountability is going to be.
Thank you. That was great. George, I want you to focus on this, but I wonder if I could change your focus just a little bit. We now, I think it's official. I'm not sure. You all help me on this. We have a president-elect. I believe we do, right? I've been very confused over the last few weeks. I'm a person in the law, and usually when people lose lawsuits, that's kind of the end of things. But we're in a different world. But we do have a president-elect, and he seems to be working feverishly towards the notion that leadership can really reflect America, whether it's the selection of his running mate, the communications team that he's put in place, or the promise regarding the first vacancy on the Supreme Court. The president-elect appears to be trying to walk the talk. I wonder, tell me, George, if you would, what do you think of the president-elect doing that, attempting in very purposeful ways to be very public about those kinds of selections? How does that affect the business world, and particularly Wall Street, if you can comment on that?
Yeah, so a couple things. Look, I can tell you that any functioning adult with two brain cells to rub together, who could think more about the country than themselves, would do better than the last administration. The bar for Joe Biden is so low that it's hard not to be good. Now, I like Joe Biden, and I think the things that he's doing are right. Kamala Harris is terrific. It sends a great message, and I think she's going to be a terrific vice president. And there are lots of things that I think will guide the country into a better place, notwithstanding the headwinds that still exist from 70 million of our fellow Americans who may feel differently. Why? Sometimes I'm sure I don't know. But he has challenges, and he's not going to be able to solve all of this by himself in one term, in 1 year, one term. There has to be lots of changes. And the changes are legislative changes. They are leadership changes. It's moral compass, changes. It's the reduction of fear of people who think that something is going to be taken away from them because someone else is given a chance. And by the way, I just want to go back to what Sheena was saying in terms of companies. If you can measure it, you can manage it. When I talk to lots of people in business about what's going on in terms of opportunity, I hear constantly the notion of, well, we want qualified people. Well, that's a given. Anybody you want to hire or give a chance to should be qualified. You don't need to tell me that the Black kid that I'm bringing in needs to be qualified. I know he's qualified. I'm not 100% sure that you're qualified when you got to the position that you're in. And the second thing was, don't tell me about the notion what does it mean when you have targets or goals? Does that mean quotas? We can't have quotas. And I go nuts when I hear quotas. I said, listen, there have been quotas in this country for 300 years. You know what those quotas were? No Blacks. That's the quota. No Blacks. So don't tell me about quotas, because there's been quotas all along. So we need to have goals. We need to have targets. I think it's important that you measure it. And the people who cleave to the ideas of justice and opportunity should get rewarded, because it's going to affect their actual business. And it's been shown that a more diverse staff and workforce, different ideas of thought, perform significantly better. And then the notion of, well, we can't find them. I can't tell you how ridiculous that is. It's absolutely ridiculous. If these companies just took the time and the effort to do the work, to go where the talent is and develop it, they would find it. Anyway, back to President-elect Biden. He has his challenges. I think he's on the right track. I think he's selecting the right people. I have my own person in mind for the next vacancy of the Supreme Court, but we can discuss that another time. And it's not going to be easy for them, because there's this whole movement that has come out from the sewers to fight against this.
George, that was great. Thank you for sharing that and contextualizing it as well. This is really a great panel, because we're really getting to a lot of issues, and I really cherish everyone's contribution. Let me just change the topic slightly. Many people of color experience a type of isolation in their workplace that is reflected in the notion that a particular experience is unique to them, particularly if it's negative. They feel that they're by themselves, or only this kind of negativity happens to them. I know my own experience is in law firms in the 80s is the chosen ones were allowed to fail, and they were not determined by those failures. They were allowed to fail, learn, and proceed. Those that weren't among the chosen, once they failed, that was thought to be an affirmation that they didn't belong. I wonder if you could share either experiences that you've had or observed, so that maybe some of our audience will know how to deal with disappointments, and to push on and realize that it's not them. Jaime, do you want to start us off on that, if you would, please?
Sure. I mean, I think that one of the things that I've experienced over time more than once is people decide they want what they think is humor to try and relate to you. And they just end up, making some racist, terrible, stereotypical comment. And you just sit there with your jaw on the ground, and you have nowhere to turn. And that's something I experienced many times. It's not even behind your back. It's like right to your face.
Exactly.
Chuckle. It's crazy. And I think that, I think people who are in their 20s now coming into business, despite everything and all the tension and all the negativity we're seeing now, there's also so much more awareness that we've built. There's so much more sensitivity that's both structurally built in, and then on a one-to-one basis happening, where I think, first of all, I will say that there's much more diversity in a place like Ogilvy now, where I spent most of my career. I mean, it's night and day. It's amazing and wonderful to see. So now people have others who look like them, who come from similar backgrounds, to share their experience, to lean on each other. That's something we didn't have for years and years and years. And I think it's been accelerated by the creation of affinity groups in most major corporations that were really started by the employees themselves. They said, we've got to find a way to get our voice heard within this corporate community about our values, our background, how we think, how we feel, and how this kind of behavior affects us. And it becomes a more productive, positive, and inclusive way for us to learn about each other. And I think that's a much better place to be than where I was in the 80s.
Thanks. That's great. Let me share a question from the audience, if I may. Here's the question posed. How can lay staff members charge leaders to practice introspection to enhance their own cultural sensitivity and humility? It's a mouthful, but I think it's a good question, which is basically, if you are not among the empowered, how do you empower yourself by bringing leadership along? Sheena, could I ask you to start with that one, please?
Sure. And I think starting the answer that I would start with is realizing your power, right? You might not be in a senior position, but you do have power and influence. And if you want to start a conversation, so one of the things just in this conversation, this is all very personal. And I think we have to appreciate that whether you're Black, Latinx, white, woman, man, like you have a personal experience and stake in what we're dealing with and grappling with around diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, etc. And so this is and so there's a lot of emotion in that. And when you are in an organization where you do want there to be some conversation, some to kind of go on a journey, I think one of a way to do it is kind of strengthen numbers, right? Find if you have affinity groups or ERGs, or if you just have like-minded people, come together and approach someone who you think will help move the conversation within your organization and say, we think this is really important. We think this will make us better, as George said, a better organization, institution, company. And a little research on these courageous kinds of conversations that need to happen and say, I'm willing to help. In my role where I sit, where I stand, kind of in my power, I'm willing to help us do this and kind of build some colleagues and camaraderie around helping move the organization. I think one of the things, we have a very diverse like donor base and board is not as diverse as it needs to be. And one of the things I'm appreciating is that like these are, when we are talking, me, George, Jaime, we're people of color, we're talking about our experiences. We have and then the reaction, from our white colleagues might be like, one, I didn't know or appreciate, right? That's not their reality. So they're learning, they're going on a journey, but also a little defensiveness too, right? And so what we've learned is like, we got to grow together because as Jaime said earlier, you can have kind of policy systems, kind of, pronouncements, but they don't change hearts and minds, right? The hearts and minds changes that actually get to the behavior changes, the real cultural change in an organization. It comes from learning and growing and feeling, safe to, ask questions that might be met with, that's ridiculous, kind of thing. And to be able to have that. So it's a tricky thing. But I think what's happening now is there's so much energy around wanting to have a conversation, wanting to go on that journey. And if you have that sense, find some kind of like-minded people and approach others to kind of build some momentum in your organization. And there's lots of information out there to help figure out like what are the steps to that journey.
Well, that's great advice, and thank you, because I think one thing that everyone wants to know is what specifically can I do, and I think that was great advice. Another question from our audience, and I wondered, George, if I could ask you to tackle this. It was, assume you're back in your late teens and early 20s, which means no salt and pepper up top, beautiful fro that would allow you to be on Soul Train, no doubt. And however, you're young again, but it's 2020. What advice would you give to yourself, knowing what you do from the past, if you were transformed, Dorian Gray-like?
So I'm going to answer that in a second. I just want to build on what Sheena said.
Of course.
Sheena mentioned trying to get a group together, talking about education, the journey, winning hearts and minds. I agree with that. But I also think that we have to engage in personal tutoring and education. And what that means is, if you want to win somebody's heart and mind or try to move them, you need to do it on a one-to-one basis. And that requires some courage, and it makes you weary because we will be educating lots of folks. But having that one-to-one conversation over lunch, over a coffee, it doesn't matter how senior the person is, if you can get to have a sit down, even for 10 or 15 minutes, to talk about whatever that issue is or whatever you think that person needs to be enlightened to, will one, give you an understanding of how far you have to go with that person, or you will accrue respect from that senior person for having that type of conversation. And I'm willing to bet that if the person is willing to grow, they will in fact grow. Maybe not as quickly as you would like, but they will. Judge, if I could, go back and I was a teenager, now in 2020,
No, not now.
I couldn't do everything. Two, I would make sure I quickly. I didn't have a lot of mentors in terms of going into the business when I started, but now there are a lot more opportunities to have mentors that look like you. And the third thing I would do was I would be uniquely focused on my goals, but also balancing my life. And those are the things I would focus on. And I'm assuming you mean a teenager, someone who's about to graduate from college.
Yes. Yeah. That's how I took the question. Jaime, I wonder if you'd answer the same question, and then I'll lead, if I may, after that into the next question from our audience.
I'm not sure I would answer all that differently from George from what we heard of his answer, because it broke up a little bit. But I think now what I would do differently than I did back then is I would try and have much more of a balance in terms of what I could do outside the workplace from a social responsibility standpoint, from a giving back standpoint. I think a lot of people of my generation were so busy trying to pull themselves up that maybe we didn't do enough for the broader community. And there's a lot better people than me who did. But I think as I look back on it now, I would encourage us to, if you're graduating from the college, yes, look after your career, but look after those around you and see how you can contribute, because that's going to make as big an impact as anything else you do in your climb.
Now, I hope everyone heard that and you didn't break up, because that was an important message. Thank you. Jaime, I wonder, one of the questions from our listening audience was, what are some of the ways to advocate with senior leadership at your company, corporation, workplace, to devote funds to professional development and retention of employees, particularly employees of color?
I will tell you that I was amazed over the last 5 years how people, how younger junior staff were unafraid to write directly to the CEO. And it depends on the company culture, but even if it's frowned upon, I think we should have that level of courage to express that point of view with a case that says, here's why this is important. Here's why this matters to employees like me. Here's why this is going to make the culture better. And let's take a chance, or let's see what happens, because guess what? Most companies spend so much money on so many things that ultimately don't matter. And so why not direct effort, resource, and funds to things that are clearly important to a day-to-day up-and-coming staff, and that will enhance the company overall. I think that being brave and being focused about what you're asking for and what the rationale is, seems to have worked in my experience.
That's great. And, you know, the beauty of this particular panel is we actually have a boss. So I wonder, Sheena, take a moment, maybe share your own organization or organizations that you've worked in, but now you have your own. I'm a little person in your organization. Are there things that you've done either programmatically or systematically that make me feel like I can talk to the boss of the organization? I can actually knock on the door and say, excuse me, CEO Wright, I have an idea.
Absolutely. And I think the younger generation does feel, you know, that they have the power to communicate and articulate, you know, what they're thinking, what they're displeased around, or what they want to do very proactively. And, you know, we actually have a culture committee at United Way that really is focused, and it's people from all over the organization, different levels, different departments, and they really are charged and forged with, you know, keeping, making sure that people are engaged and empowered. And what I tell people, and it was actually a story I heard from Mayor Dinkins, who just passed away. We lost a Columbia, just a hero in so many ways. But he told this story about a waiter who was serving a table, and you know, he was giving each person a pat of butter, and one person said, "I want 2 pats of butter," and he's like, there's just 1 pat of butter per person, and the person was belligerent. "I said I want 2 pats of butter. Do you know who I am? You know, I'm so and so and such." And the waiter looked at him and said, "Do you know who I am?" He said, "I'm the guy with the butter." And you know, I actually told that story at class day at Columbia, and it's like, you have the butter, right? You have power always, and that is something I communicate to my team, appreciating that and using it, right? And just one thing I want to say, to really reinforce what Jaime said about for his younger self. So many young people think, I can't engage in social change or philanthropy until I have money. You have talent, you have skill, you have arms and legs and, you know, and energy. And if we're going to solve these social problems, we need you now, not to wait until, you know, you've made it, you know, impact and philanthropy and investing your treasure, your talent, and your time are all valuable and important things to do right now. So I want to encourage people to do that because it's so needed.
Let me just take that question and tweak it just a little bit, because we're taking ourselves back from decades ago, and we're coming forward. All of you seem to be uniform in saying there's a duality that we have to challenge ourselves to engage in. Let's focus just on the school part of it. We're actually in school. Many law students ask me this question: Judge, I'm into social justice. I want to be on this committee. I want to do this activity, and you know, I'll get to my studies, and you know, I'm going to be in social justice. I don't really need A's. I wonder if now that is a real question that many students face. They feel the compulsion to do as you all have alluded to, and they don't mind if it's at the cost of a more intimate understanding of the material. So could you maybe Jaime, and then Sheena, and then George, each of you in your different fields now, but think about when you were a student and you had that kind of challenge. What would you now, with your experience, tell yourselves? Because I feel like what we've been talking about the last few moments has been the time that we were out of school. And I wonder if we could just focus for a moment on the time that we were in school. Jaime, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm not sure I'm going to answer precisely maybe the way you posed the question, but I would, I mean, and I hope a lot of people, I feel like a lot of people do this. I hope you do, which is, if you're at Columbia, you have an incredible opportunity to experience as much as you are willing to bite off and chew. And I saw a lot of my friends who didn't do that. They were so focused on, going to law school, getting an MBA, getting that, like I didn't feel that, they got as much out of the experience as they should. And so I would encourage you, I tried to do that. I could have done a better job. I wish I had done more, because you do have the energy, you have the intellect, you're capable of more than you think. And being able to just lap it all up is, I think, so important. And like, get out of your comfort zone and go out and meet people and find ways to learn more about things that are part of your immediate world. Because you kind of develop a bubble at school, right? You've got like, here's my friends and my dorm and my, like, you got to try. The more you can get out of that, I think the more rich the experience.
No, that's great. Thank you. George, and then Sheena, please.
So I think this is the portion of the panel where there might be some divergence in opinions. I think if you're in school, you should be uniquely focused on being the best person and student that you could be. The better you do, the better the opportunities will be, generally speaking. Having said that, you can't do everything. And as I said, one of the things I would have changed would have been to prioritize better. My advice and counsel to a student would be focus on your studies, be a healthy person socially and spiritually, and pick one or two things that you are very passionate about and run with it. You can't solve every problem. You can't do everything. And the better you do, the better your opportunities will be. The notion, as you mentioned, Judge, about the law student that says, "Oh, I'm going into social justice, so I really don't need to focus on my tax court courses or whatever towards contracts." I think that's false. I think that a lot of students that say that are deluding themselves. The primary reason that they're in school is to learn and study, and the demonstration of learning and studying perhaps is doing well. But they can also do other things. It's not like you are, one track. I'm just saying that there needs to be some prioritization. And what I tell young people who come into our firm and they say, "Oh, I'm thinking about, doing a joint degree in law and business, 3 years down the road, and, this, that, and the other." And what I say to them is, clear the first hurdle first. The first hurdle is being excellent at the job you accepted and that the firm is looking for you to do, to add value to the organization and add luster to the organization. Additionally, make sure that you are a meaningful part of the community, broadly speaking.
Thanks, George. That's great advice. Sheena, I wonder if you could share your thoughts, and then I have a bookend because I have another question that is specifically focused, asking for your response.
Great, sure. I'm quite frankly surprised by the comment, Judge Greenaway, that that couldn't have been somebody at Columbia Law School who was saying that. I mean, this is a high achieving group, right? The people that go to Columbia undergrad law school, but these are high achievers. So to think that, it doesn't matter. How'd you get to Columbia? Now, come on. I don't know.
There's no grand jury secrecy, so I'll share that it was not a Columbia person.
See, that's what I thought.
Just so we're clear, it wasn't a Harvard person either.
Okay. Because I do think that the culture and environment of Columbia as an institution are people who are curious and want to really master, right, whatever we have in front of us. And so there's a culture and a community of that. And I think even at the college, because of the core, even though, rallied against it when I was there, but it forces you to look at, not be one track, right? To look at lots of different things. But I would also say, this notion that working in the social justice world, somehow it's okay to be less skilled, right? Or less rigorous. It is an absolutely false one, right? You actually have to be very skilled and very accomplished in order to perform and do what needs doing. And certainly, when I was at the law school, not to brag, but I was a Harlan Fisk Stone Scholar. I mean, that there's you got to bring your best. You got to bring your.
You can brag a little, baby. You can brag a little.
That's right. You got to bring your A game to that work in particular. And I have to say I had because I worked in corporate sector for 10 years and I've been a nonprofit, but there was an investment banker. I went to a talk, and he wasn't a Columbia alum. He was a Harvard alum, actually. And he told this group of young investment bankers, if you don't want to work hard, go work at a nonprofit. I was so offended. I worked at Wachtell, which is you can't work harder in terms of number of hours. I have never worked harder in my life than the work that we do in the nonprofit sector. And quite frankly, there's more at stake, people's lives, right? So for that work, it's hard work and you need to be really damn good at it. And so that's what I said about that.
Well, I'm going to share my own personal experience on that very point. I was at a New York law firm doing what young lawyers at New York law firms do, how 25, 3,000, whatever the exact number was. When I went to the government to work as a federal prosecutor, oh my Lord, how much money would I have made for the firm if I billed those amount of hours? Because
right.
that was,
and you have less resources to do your job.
7 days a week, and I learned how to type, which back in the day was a real accomplishment. But we don't have much time, and there are a couple of important questions that I just want to get out. Sheena, I said that there was going to be a bookend question for you, and the question was from a young African-American woman who was quite accomplished, got into several Ivy League schools, and then got into and attended Columbia. And when she shared this story with a white classmate, the white classmate said, well, of course you got into all those schools. You're a twofer. And the question was, have you encountered that, I think we all could answer for you if we needed to, but we're not going to because we know you're quite able. But I wondered if you would share your experience with comments like that.
Always, right? I mean, there's always an assumption that you are less capable or qualified because you Black woman, et cetera. And so, I mean, when I went to a boarding school for high school, so I got this very early, predominantly white school, and one of my kind of white classmates, and I've told this story before, said to me, you're Black, you're a woman, I'm from the South Bronx. He was like, isn't that like having 3 strikes in terms of your capabilities? And I was like, 3 strikes? Does that mean I'm out? I can't even get up to bat as the 3 strikes? And I said, well, and again, not to brag, I said, if I have 3 strikes, I'm at the top of the class. If I have 3 strikes, how come I'm the captain of the cross country team? I did cross country at Columbia, go Lions. And I said, well, maybe those things make me stronger. You know, maybe those are assets that are real strengths. And so I think for what I would say to other women of color who were people, you have this impression that those are liabilities and that you're only in a position because of, you know, I don't even know, you know, what is that, appreciate again who you are, what you bring, your strength, that those things are strengths, and a cop, you know, and you, in spite, you know, in spite of what people assume those traits about you demonstrate, you have achieved because you're there. No, and I think as Jaime said, you know, you got to be, what Condoleezza Rice said, twice as good. You're there because you're twice as good.
No, yeah, I think it's something that we've all experienced. I'd be interesting on a different panel to hear whether young folks with backgrounds like us feel that they have to be twice as good, because I know all of our parents told us that we had to be at least twice as good. We just have a couple of minutes left, and I want to ask a question that maybe we can get 30 seconds from George and 30 seconds from Jaime. One of the last question that we're going to take from our audience goes something like this. I am a minority student. I don't know whether it was African-American or Latino, so let's assume either or both in this hypothetical. And I feel a duality. I'm in a rarefied air in an academic environment that was wonderful. I moved to, Wall Street, law firms, whatever. And while I succeed, much of my community doesn't. How do I deal with that? And Jaime, maybe you can give us 30 seconds on that, and George, and we're going to have to call that a day.
I think we touched on this a little earlier, right? Which is, we framed it up a little bit about what we'd be doing now if we were just graduating. I think a lot of us feel the pull of taking care of those closest to us. A lot of us come from very difficult backgrounds. We might have to get out of school, get a job, and suddenly we're supporting a single mother or siblings, and you don't feel like you have the resource and time to help others. And so I think finding a way to see how you can, I don't have an easy answer for you for that question. I think it's an inherent tension in there. But it's something that, I think we all have to think about how we make that kind of impact. I think that duality is just a reality for us.
I think that's right. Thank you. George, I know it's hard, but 30 seconds if you would.
Yes. First of all, going back to Sheena and building on her comments, mediocrity does not cut it in anything. Nonprofit, for-profit, church, athletics, mediocrity has no place for anybody. So mediocrity is out, excellence is in. In terms of your question, look, first, you have to realize that burden is not one that you have to carry alone. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's always opportunity to help your community. And by being successful yourself, you serve as a beacon to others. And as you reach back, you're able to pull people along. And so that's the way to get it done.
George, that was great, and a wonderful way for us to end. Now, what I'd like to tell our audience is you all experienced a real treat this evening. This is an unbelievable panel that, frankly, I would have paid money to hear. So thank you to Sheena, thank you to Jaime, and thank you to my friend George. We go back a little ways. He still has hair, I don't. When I knew him, I had more hair than him. But I want to thank each of you for helping us out on these really, really transformational topics. And I hope that our audience enjoyed the evening. We are all lifetime Columbia people. Reach out to us. I'm the easiest man in America to find. Federal judge, look me up. If I can help you in any way, I will. And I know the same is true for George, Jaime, and Sheena. Be well and thanks so much. Be safe during the pandemic. One day, it'll be over.
Thank you, Judge Greenaway. Thank you.
Thank you.